Recruitment, as you say, Mike, is absolutely key when it comes to appointing a manager. And one side who really put the effort in, a potential masterstroke by Stuart Webber, I guess, was getting Daniel Farke to Norwich. And he will be the main subject of today's podcast. Now, the German he's a very likable character. The players clearly love him. It felt at the time like a left field appointment, but there's plenty, if you go into his backstory, there's plenty of sustenance and substance to this, because he had tremendous success. It was Lippstadt first, and then, of course, over at Borussia Dortmund. But he rebuilt Lippstadt from very, very humble beginnings, and he was absolutely everything at that club. From, the chairman even said, I've never seen a manager that is that close to a group of players. And when his contract was wound down, he was paraded on a horse around the pitch, and it's extraordinary the amount of praise and the thanks that he got for everything he's done there. This is not a man who comes and goes to clubs, is it? This is a man who, when he's there, he throws absolutely everything in. That he's never resigned and he's never left a club mid-contract. He's always seen it out. And this is exactly what he appears to be at Norwich. He could have walked away when they went down and he still would have been a hero, but he stayed, he's rebuilt, and they're back up to the top flight. Daniel Farker, he's all in, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a spiritual leader, I guess I would call him, of like the highest caliber. He's all about galvanizing people, rallying everybody behind a cause. You're either in or, FIFO, as someone said in the Norwich camp, which, you either fit in or do one, basically, if, that's the way a Daniel Farker regime works. It's kind of all for one type mentality. And yeah, he's pretty, the best comparison we can make is Jurgen Klopp. There's a lot of similarities other than the fact that the German and, I say spiritual leader. It's almost like he creates a cult around the club, and it's that level of emotion of buy-in that's there, and he's very good at managing relationships. He's a brilliant communicator, being able to make everybody within a group feel listened to and understood, but then making sure that they comply with what the group's needs are. You've got a core, you've got individuals, you've got a manager, you've got a management team, but ultimately there's this other force that is his primary concern. And that's the overall group dynamic that's, almost an external force, but that's every decision he's making is what protects this group identity that we've got, this thing that we need to collectively buy into.
And he is about protecting the group as well, because he's spoken before about sort of fans' opinion and noises on social media as well. And he's just sort of said that, it doesn't really matter. It's all about what goes on right here, in the bubble, I guess. And he clearly, as well, though he's not particularly, he's not particularly overly friendly with the media. He's perfectly capable of giving them sound bites. But at the end of the day, he'll always protect his players. They'll always come first over everything, won't they?
Yeah, I think he uses the media brilliantly, in the sense that I listen to his interviews and I don't find his interviews particularly fascinating or engaging. He's not one of the most engaging managers to listen to, but you listen to what he actually says, and there's nobody who gets the message on point as often. You read it, you read a transcript of what he says, and I don't think there's a manager out there who knows exactly what he's saying and why he's saying it every single sentence throughout a post-match interview. It's all about protecting the image, I suppose, or the managing the future expectations, keeping pressure off the players. Literally, there's something loaded in every single thing that he says. He'll praise the opposition. Every single week he comes out with a different way, a different perspective of how to view the opposition just played or you're about to play. You don't say anything in advance of a game that might inflame the opposition or might get them wound up. You praise them heavily. He goes into specifics, like he's really done his research on that team. He's got lots of nice things to say about them. And then after the game, he'll framing is the key word. The way he frames things is it kind of helps to push things forward. He almost writes the headlines for the reporters. and it's all well thought through in advance, and it's all for the future well-being of the players, that they're going to be in the best possible frame of mind for the following week, for the next game, keep the pressure off them, make them feel like they're doing a good job, and everything keeps moving forward.
And intelligence is clearly a big part as well. He was described, by the way, I don't know if you saw this quote, but by one of his, I think it was his former strike partner, towards the end of his career, as slow but very intelligent. That was what he was described as on the pitch. And clearly he's put this intelligence into good use throughout his career. And also worth noting as well, Mike, is that he spoke about, this was soon after his appointment at Norwich, he was asked why Norwich. And, most managers would I guess, wheel out some sort of claptrap about big club, etc., try and get the fans on side. But he talked about how he studied Norwich, he studied the hierarchy, looked at how things were from top to bottom, and he felt that it was a really good match for him.
Yeah, I think he tends to go deep. I think this is when he talks about other clubs, like, in pre-match preparation. I think he does his research in order to frame things well, and I think that framing's a big thing. There always has to be a reason why for everything. It's like I think he intuitively understands that if you can put a good perspective on something, you get people to understand the reason why. Then the buy-in's there. If he comes up with a good reason why Norwich, then you can answer that question once, and it's never a question again because you've answered it so well the first time. And I think that's generally the way he works with most things. Is that because he puts so much care and attention into what other people think and how they interpret things, and he understands that he's in the middle of this. He's able to control what people think by saying the right thing at the right time in the right way. Then you kind of save yourself work in the future. And he is a future thinker. He does think steps ahead, and he is always looking about, trying to protect or trying to, just make those paths straightforward for him in the future. So he likes to get in ahead of things and say the right thing in the right way. So that I think what you find with Norwich is they're not a club where the same issues keep cropping up over and over again. He has a really good tendency to nip things in the bud and get in ahead of things because he anticipates emotional needs sometimes before they emerge a lot of the time.
When you say future thinker then, and planning for future eventualities, what might come, could that be a factor in the fact that Norwich failed to win any of their last 10 Premier League games last season? Was he already looking at the Championship? Was he already planning for next season? Do you think he maybe, they were all but relegated, I guess, by that point, but do you think he potentially was already maybe too far ahead?
It has emerged since that a lot of planning went on in that period, and whether that's filtered through, I'm not entirely sure. It was notable that he emerged from lockdown really positive, as though Norwich would get out of trouble. But he's such an all-in type character that it's kind of a conflict going on here because, he's keep taking care of everyone's emotional needs, and he seems to have so much handled all the time. But then the moment he's not got it handled, it's a fine line and it can completely flip the other way. So I think there was a little bit of that going on, that he just didn't have a handle on the Premier League, that they hadn't necessarily prepared as well as they might have done in terms of recruitment. They just weren't good enough. And, as much as he tried to galvanise his normal methods didn't work because they simply weren't good enough, and it needed a reset, it needed relegation. And I think during the course of relegation at the beginning of last season was a very, very interesting period because there was clearly some unhappy players there that needed to be shipped out, and there was uncertainty about certain players' futures, probably players who went back to the Premier League, believed they were Premier League standard now. And Farke had to call players out at the beginning of the season. It was a real sort of tension period. I remember a game at Bournemouth away where they lost 1-0. And he seemed to be calling everyone out. It looked like, not knowing the inside track at the time and having heard it since, I was on the outside looking in thinking Farker could go here. I think this might be the end of him at Norwich. And little did I know at the time, he had such, he was backed to the hilt behind the scenes at boardroom level. And there was never any doubt about his future. So that put him in a position of strength. And Norwich as a team and as a club have emerged so much better for that level of support that he had at that time.
Do you think he's the sort of manager that would really struggle and would really crumble without that support, without that guess it's a safety net, isn't it, to fall back on? Obviously, we know all about the how it is at Norwich with, as we mentioned, Stuart Webber, and obviously they're very good owners and lots of support around him. It was the same at Lippstadt as well in Germany, that he was very close to the chairman there. He was allowed to bring in some former teammates to work alongside as well. The situation less clear at Borussia Dortmund, but generally speaking, it feels like he's always had really good backing. He's always had really good people around him, people that he already sort of knows he can work alongside. If things weren't quite as, secure, do you think we'd see a completely different side to Farker?
Quite possibly. I think it's, in a sense, it's a hypothetical question as well, though, because I do think he's good at managing relationships, not just a dressing room, all relationships. He manages the support, he manages the media. And to some degree, I'm sure he has, I believe he's able to be very, very honest with Stuart Webber. And I think he cultivates them relationships behind the scenes anyway. I think, but if he didn't have that support behind him, then I don't think his methods would work. I don't think he'd crumble. I think he'd be comfortable with the fact, but it would just spectacularly go wrong, I think, and then he'd move on. But not doubting himself and his ability to replicate what he's done elsewhere. So I think the support is essential. I think if he did not have that support behind the scenes last season, I think he would have. I don't think he would have been able to stay in that job at Norwich, because I think some of the things he said, it was a real crunch time, because he was really laying down the law. And if some players weren't on board and were kept behind the scenes, it would have been really difficult for him, because to be continually undermined. And it just so happened that because he had the support at boardroom level, he got exactly the response he wanted and needed out of the players. And once he got going, then we see Farker at his best. We see Farker managing a good thing and keeping it going by just always saying the right thing and framing things perfectly.
Let's talk about some of his methods on a day-to-day basis. And I want to hone in on the Wheel of Fortune here. I'm sure you've read about this, and we've talked about various ways of players being inspired and I guess being kept motivated. And certainly we've heard about various wacky systems in place. But the Wheel of Fortune at Norwich is basically when a player is issued with a fine, maybe for being late or missing important meeting or something like that, instead of just paying the fine outright, Farker will get them to spin the Wheel of Fortune. Options on the Wheel of Fortune include pay half the fine, pay double the fine, no fine at all. One option, which unfortunately for Marco Stiepermann, he landed on, was to clean Daniel Farker's car inside and out. So games like this, I guess, just bring a little bit of fun to proceedings. And you can see why with things like that, the players really enjoy working alongside him.
Yeah, there's another manager who does this as well, Sean Dyche, same flow state. And I think what it is it's turning something that's cold and clinical, as in a fining system and a way of imposing certain behaviours, turning it into a fun experience. So even the punishment reward system is a fun experience for everyone, and everyone's involved. It's not just chasing up individuals to pay fines. It's like, let's get everyone round and let's have some fun around this issue, and drawing attention to the fact of what's right and wrong at the same time, but making it a fun experience. So this kind of, feeds it. It's part of a flow state. It's not necessarily something that Farker's thought long and hard about. This is just about understanding dynamics and what makes a tense situation less tense, and what just understanding the way that people of different status interact with each other, because he'll be very big on status, I imagine. There'll be senior players, there'll be, younger players who earn the spurs in terms of unspoken contracts, basically. We all behave a certain way according to our levels of status. Some players are more trusted than others, but, we're all kind of under the same cause, the same umbrella. But also understanding, when what things can create tension or can create disappointment amongst players, or things that might fester in the long run. How can we make this something that's a bit more lighthearted? It kind of gets the point across. It makes the point that we've all got to behave and conduct ourselves in a certain way. There's certain standards we have to meet, and we'll try to make light of people that do wrong. But, ultimately, we're getting a sense of right and wrong across and what our values are and our standards. But at the same time, we're all having a laugh and we're all in it together.
Yeah, good to see a quiz show as well, getting a reference. Maybe if they play well, they can get the opportunity to pick something from Buddy's prize board. Who knows? one thing that he does say, though, is that although, discipline is necessary, he doesn't actually believe in instilling fear into his players or punishing them for mistakes, but he does believe in honesty. He believes in openness. He believes about talking and creating the right environment when it comes to work ethic. And that, to me, Mike, definitely feels like an approach that is not just taken by Farker, but I feel like it's an approach that we're talking about more and more often these days. Sort of gone are the old school managers barking out commands and putting their players on edge. It does all now seem to be about this open and honest environment, and that seems to be what is happening at Norwich.
Yeah, there's a certain type of honesty as well. I think that you can have honesty, and we go back to the Dean Smith podcast, and we're talking about he couldn't have honesty as one of his values because then you have to kind of tag onto that the word tact, because you have to be honest in a certain way. And again, we're talking in the similar realm. You have certain managers who are just blunt honest. They get straight to the point in a way that doesn't care about players' feelings. And then there's honesty and openness in a more authentic sense that makes people feel understood and heard. And that's the way it is with Farker. So, that type of honesty there's definitely a move towards that in recent years in the way that the modern footballers are treated. I do think there's probably a swell of managers nowadays of that, those natural skill sets, that emotional intelligence, more than we probably saw, a decade ago. Because I just think those types of managers are able to get the messages across better to players, because those players, I think first and foremost, the modern day player needs to feel heard and understood and needs to have faith that the current manager in charge, whether he's picking him or not, has his best interests at heart for his career. And even if he, the decisions aren't always going to suit that player, ultimately, any sort of manager that comes in nowadays and could just bomb a player out or really do damage to the career in the process of not playing them, that doesn't really wash nowadays. It's about how people are treated as people behind the scenes, regardless of status in terms of within the team, whether you're in the team, out the team, whether you're a senior player, lesser player. Players need to feel as though their careers are being looked after.
And on a serious note, I think it's a move that we're all in favour of as well. In terms of mental health, it must be so much better for the players to at least get an explanation if they're not in the side, or they're out of contract and they're not staying at the club. One other thing that Farker sort of looks at regularly is training and the intensity of training. And there's a lot of players, Mike, who arrived at Norwich who were questioned, fans looking at their track record. And, sometimes we're all guilty of it. We look at a player, we hop onto their Wikipedia or the Transfermarkt site, and we look at where they've been and how many goals they've scored, etc. We think, not sure about that signing. But what Farker does clearly is he looks beyond that, and he looks for potential and whether he can polish them up and whether he can get them in the right mindset. And there are plenty of rough diamonds who've arrived at Carrow Road that Farker has made into far, far better players.
Yeah, I would imagine that what he does is he puts himself in the perspective of those players. And if something's gone wrong in the careers, why has it gone wrong? Once he's seen the potential, it's okay, what's gone wrong in that player's career? Can I fix it just by treating him differently and treating him in a way that makes him feel respected and empowered to deliver his best? So I guess there's a lot of that going on. I think there's a lot of intelligence anyway in the way that Stuart Webber operates and the recruitment process on a technical level, because I don't think necessarily, and I think this is what maybe one of the ways in which Farker's misunderstood and even Jurgen Klopp, is that because they've built successful teams and they play a particular way that's extremely difficult to play against, we tend to assume that they're tactical geniuses, and that's not necessarily the case, which is not to say, you don't get to that level without being obviously very, clued up when it comes to the tactical side of the game. But I don't think that's their edge. I think with Farker, it's about managing this whole group collective, but also managing the emotional needs of players and understanding, that emotional intelligence side is the real strength. So I would expect that Farker looks into the background of a player and possibly looks for players that have been neglected in some way, that have shown potential in flashes, but might have been neglected, and with an arm around the shoulder or with the right encouragement and with just the ability to be able to frame their careers. We talk about his framing and his ability to take information of a situation, then basically reframe it and offer a new perspective. And this is the original way to think about this. This is the way that's going to serve you best going forward and make you feel best. You know, he'll be able to frame players' careers for them, or where they're at in the careers that serve his needs, but serve the players' needs, serve the team's needs. And just is, again, it's about that communication aspect and saying exactly the right thing in the right way at the right time.
And he's very faithful to these players as well. The promotion season before last, so the first promotion from the Championship, I think he only made one change in the last 6 or 7 games. A few more this time around because of the, you know, how quickly the games were turning around. But still, he didn't tweak things, you know, too much. And clearly, once he has his 11, once he has his 18 as well, and you're in a Farker team, you'd have to do something spectacular to get thrown out.
Yeah, and this is possibly to do with status. I suspect that this might be, you know, if you elevate somebody to senior pro status and they're one of your main generals in the team, then you don't drop them after a couple of bad performances. You stick with them because they're a senior pro, and that's where you really begin to underline the actual status dynamics. Is that, you know, I've got total faith in this guy, and he's one of my generals on the pitch. So I'm not just, you know, I'm not going to drop him lightly. It doesn't work like that, and that's how you kind of establish those boundaries of where everyone's standing is in the team, and then it kind of, I guess, it acts as a motivation to players, you know, that if you really knuckle down over a period of time and you get your own status elevated within the group, that you can expect the same treatment. You can expect that same level of security further down the line, which is a carrot for any player really in this day and age, you know, for your careers, to know that you have to do a lot wrong over a period of 6 to 12 months in order to be dropped and to be left out of the team.
Right, Mike, this is what the Norwich fans are waiting to hear. Back in the Premier League, second go at it under Daniel Farker. Of course, they started quite well initially. There's one result that we won't talk about because it'll put tears in your eyes. But they picked up some very notable results, and the performances were good as well, even when they were losing at times during the first half of the season. All unravelled during the second half. What are your expectations this time around? Because it's quite, I mean, they were quite different, weren't they, in their approach this time around to promotion?
Yeah, I think it's a club that learns lessons. I think it's very intelligently run. I think that continuity is a real strength, and certainly Farker's type of continuity, because there's no signs that he's lost any of his power at that club and that his power over that dressing room. And I think that Farker's force of personality is a very strong thing, and it didn't wane once whatsoever in the Premier League. You know, he didn't come out at any stage looking like a weaker character, for as difficult as it was. He you know, and I think there's no ceiling to his ambitions. So I don't even think survival. In Daniel Farker's mind, he will say exactly the opposite in all his press conferences. But in Daniel Farker's mind, I don't think survival even is just the limit. I think he'll be thinking of these German clubs that have really punched above the weight down the years. He'll be, you know, he might not even tell his players this, but he'll be thinking about a top half finish. There'll be no limits. But in terms of what they can achieve, I think they can survive this time around. I think that, you know, and he will say one thing out in the media that we're the underdogs, you know, and he said it continually, and then came out and admitted afterwards that I really, you know, his expectations behind the scenes were completely different to what he was saying in the media. And I think it will be much the same again. He'll be playing that underdog card at every single opportunity. Lowest budget in the league, smallest team in the league, all of those things. The bare minimum he will expect is survival. In his own mind, even if he doesn't articulate it to the players, he might even be thinking about a top half finish. But that's just Daniel Farker and the force and strength of his personality.
And as you say, you know, this is a man who has stoic beliefs and will never deviate from what he believes in. So even if say they have a flip season this time around, so the first half is terrible, but they get going for the second half, we won't be seeing Daniel Farker ripping up the script or throwing the bathwater out with the baby, whatever the phrase is. We won't be seeing him completely starting again, will we? It's still right. We're still playing the right way. We're still performing and turning up how I want them to. So even if it starts badly, he won't be panicking, will he?
No, it'll be continuity in both aspects, you know. And I think I think once he gets a good thing going, that's what enables him to maintain it and keep a good thing going. And I think what separated Norwich from other teams, and this might not be the conventional view of Norwich, but the way I see them in the 2 championship campaigns where they've won the title, it wasn't necessarily that they were because they were outstanding, on the run-ins, and opposition managers were constantly saying they're the best team in the league. They're the best team in the league. But I think it's that strength of conviction, and I think it's once you get a good thing going, they become pretty relentless, and I think that's what can happen in the Premier League. So I don't expect them to be a team that if they stay up, it's clawing the way to survival with one win every month. I think they get on a run. I think if they get a good thing going, I think they can keep it going, and it can be a surge that keeps them up, and a surge that potentially takes them higher than most people would expect at a certain point in the season. So I think that's kind of what I'm looking for from them next season. If Farke gets that foothold, really gets on top of things, and has learned the lessons from the season before.